As our country slides into another grotesquely expensive grab for power called the 2016 general election, beautiful in concept but ugly in practice, we will once again have a debate over voter ID. Those opposed, namely Democrats, will argue that it's just a veiled way to try to suppress millions of legal votes, although there is little evidence that that is true. Those in favor, namely Republicans, say voter ID prevents widespread voter fraud, although there is little evidence that is true. So why the debate? I thought of those two arguments when I rented bikes for my family this past weekend. When I asked the attendant why he needed an ID, he said, just in case you wanted to steal the bike, the ID prevents it. A friend of mine adopted a kitten for his kids a couple of weeks ago, and he also had to show an ID. Same reason. When he asked, it was just in case he had bad intentions for the kitten. The ID prevents it. The IDs keep the transaction and the intentions pure. There doesn't have to be proof or accusations. It's just in case. So why then wouldn't you have to show an ID to vote? Wouldn't you want to do everything to keep the process pure, just in case? More importantly, why would anybody be against showing an ID? Opponents, namely Democrats, will tell you that it keeps people who can't get an ID from voting, and that's just not fair. They'll tell you that there are millions of these people, and yet they trot out the same dozen or so as evidence. People like 95-year-old Viviette White. She claims she has no ID because she was born in the Jim Crow South where they didn't keep records of her birth, so she has no birth certificate. And that is horrible, but instead of making this frail 95-year-old woman who is in a wheelchair spend the rest of her life as Exhibit A, fix the problem and help her get an ID. It would make her life so much more satisfying. Because you can't get a home, you can't get a car, you can't get a driver's license, you can't get Social Security benefits, you can't get Medicare, you can't get welfare, you can't get unemployment benefits, you can't own a home, you can't get married, you can't get certain prescriptions without proper ID. Someone needs to get Viviette and others like her ID. Wouldn't that be the humane thing to do? I mean, if you really cared about her, and others like her who don't have ID, and you didn't just use them as pawns in a bigger power struggle. And then you'd be able to require voter IDs at polling places like they do in other countries with no threat of voter suppression. It keeps the process pure. Or as is the case with the kitten and the bike, you do it just in case. You see, the problem with proving voter fraud is that without the prerequisite ID, it's almost impossible. We do know that organizations have been caught illegally registering people by just writing names down on a pad. What makes you think they didn't just then use those names to pad the vote? They have precincts in Philadelphia that report 100% voter turnout. 100%. That's impossible unless you have people going through the registration rolls and casting votes illegally. We all know about large political machines that dominate cities and elections are notorious for manipulating the votes in cities like Philadelphia and Chicago. But aside from the jokes and the anecdotal and circumstantial evidence, again, it's impossible to prove. So doesn't it make sense to eliminate the possibility? I mean, after we get Viviette her proper ID. It all seems to make so much sense. You have to wonder, why is there such a fierce, well-financed, well-organized opposition to the simple task of showing an ID when you vote? And when you objectively look at it, you come up with one glaringly disturbing answer. The only reason someone would be against voter ID is because they want to allow cheating, or they want to cheat. And that's not a good answer. So let's fix that, just in case. I'm Larry Menti. See you next week.